Hey guys, my name is Matt Clemens. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Over the next 55 minutes, Vanessa and I are going to walk through several of the different ways that we can use the advanced list tools to attack data on different sides of the Blackbaud system from 100 different angles. I spent 5 years working for Blackbaud prior to starting my own consulting business 12 years ago. Now I spend 95% of my time working with independent schools on custom reporting projects that leverage a lot of these advanced list tools to push the data to Power BI and enable us to automate the real-time interactive setup of dashboarding tools that feed data from admissions, registrar, development, finance into online reporting portals where users can interact with it. I'd be thrilled to connect with anyone who has any interest in discussing any of that further, but the advanced list tools that we're looking at today are the backbone of a lot of what I spend my time building with schools now. Hope you enjoy. Thanks. I'll show this out once we're done. So, Vanessa, do you want to share your screen out again, and then we can go from there? Awesome. Thank you. And Vanessa, if you want to give a quick intro of yourself as well, if you don't mind.
Yep, I'm Vanessa No, and I'm the registrar at Davidson Day School. We are located in North Carolina, Davidson, North Carolina. Small private school, 500 kids, and I think I met a lot of you guys also at Blackbaud. That's how I met Matt.
Awesome. And really, my hope is that this is a really, 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 really interactive next hour. So I don't want to just sit here in a bubble and build stuff. Questions through, just scream them out as you think of them or send them through the chat. I want to make sure that we're going back and forth on this instead of just me into the void. So I am going to request control of Vanessa's screen.
Okay, yeah, there was
You're welcome.
backing out, just call me.
There we go. Perfect. And really, I think the fact that everyone is in a session about advanced lists right now, have most of us, at least taken a stab at an advanced list at some point.
Okay, let me find the land.
Can we have everybody mute, please?
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I think I just muted the background noise there. But anybody who's never seen an advanced list or never heard of an advanced list or even the topic of advanced list, it's brand new. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just work with the assumption. Actually, I'm going to mute Jorge here. Sorry. There we go. Just keeping half an eye on where the noise is coming from. But please unmute, jump in, ask questions as we're going. The advanced list, for those of you guys who have not spent a ton of time within the back end of the system, is the set of tools that enables us to build really, really, really customizable sets of reporting tools within the Blackbaud suite. Over the past 3, 4, 5 years, they've released several of the SkyList tools that enable us to get some of the pre-built, predefined lists up and running. But a lot of times they just don't let us get as deep as we might want to get when we're looking for things on the advanced list side. So, examples of things that I do within the advanced lists are actually, I see Reed on the call right now from Kingsley up in Boston, but we hopped on a call yesterday and we were looking at several things related to admissions data where the candidate list gets us somewhere, but as soon as I want to be able to pull any data field that isn't natively available, we're just kind of stuck. And you can try to stitch together, a user list with a candidate list, but Reed and I dug in and went the advanced list route, and we were able to pull several additional layers of detail. So I'm going to start with some advanced lists that Vanessa and I, discussed before we hopped on that I think could be useful. And in building them, we'll kind of talk through how and why we're doing what we're doing. But I want, real feedback from you guys on ways that we could be doing a lot of things differently, or, other tools that might be useful from your end. So when I jump into reporting, I'll jump into manage lists. And then within the manage lists section, this build a new list, if I were to click this, that'll take me into the Sky lists where I've got 10 or 12 different list types that we can build directly in the system. But anytime I'm going to do anything with advanced lists, I'm going to come into that manage basic and advanced lists section. And so, for today, as we're digging into the Davidson Day School system, we're going to be really careful. I'm not going to expose any private information of any student or of any parent. So we're not going to show, email addresses. We're not going to show phone numbers, but we will show the information that's right next to those pieces on the record, knowing that if we were to click the one more button, we could potentially, pull any data point that we want out. I just want to make sure that because we are recording this and potentially sharing it out with other users, that we're not exposing Vanessa's information anywhere beyond where we'd like to share it. So as I'm building a list, a lot of times I will start with a list template, which gets me 45% of the way there. It starts to build some of the structure on the back end of the list, and it just saves me a little bit of time as I'm building the list. But for today, we're going to start totally from scratch. And what I want to do today is I'm going to start by building 2 different student lists. So one of them is going to show me, 1 row per student in my school. We'll put out the student grade level. We'll put out the student first name. We're not going to put last name. We're not going to show any identifying information, but we'll show grade level, student ID. And then I want to see in separate columns next to that student, I want to see a bunch of parent info. So I'm not going to put out names. In this case, I'm not even going to put out first names, but I'll output some sort of an ID tied to a record. And I'll put the parent-child relationship type. So whether it's a parent or a step-parent. Having built that, it would be very, very, very simple for us to just add the couple extra boxes to output the names and the email addresses. So as you guys are following along, that would all work perfectly with the way that we're setting this up. I just don't want to push that out into this shared space. And then the second list that we're going to build is very, very, very similar to that, where I'm going to pull a list of every student enrolled in the school, but rather than 1 row per student with columns going out to the right, showing my parent names in separate columns, I'm going to say, give me 1 row per student-parent relationship. So if I have a student who has, mom and stepdad and dad, I want to see 3 separate rows for that student listed on each of those 3 rows, and then that next set of columns showing each of the relations as a separate row. That may be a case where I'm trying to isolate, the parents of all my, male 11th grade, non Caucasian students. So I can use this in 100 different ways as I'm either building out push page lists or just to isolate the data in the back end of the system. So we'll start with this create advanced list. And as we jump into this space, the select objects is really where I tell the system what is the set of tables that contains the information that I want to be able to tell something about. And this is, the first time we look at it, it can be really scary and really sticky. A lot of times, subtables don't even expose themselves until we've selected a table that contains some higher level information. So right now, within the constituent information, I'm going to start with this user base. Note that right now, when I'm looking at this, I only see a really small number of options under constituent information. But as soon as I select that user base, it opens up several additional sets of data that I can pull tied to that user base. And that's kind of the nature of the advanced lists, is there are only so many places that I can start. But once I've started in pulling some data, it opens possibilities for me to go layers and layers and layers deeper to pull, other information about the records in my system. So user base really is just the set of core information that contains first name, last name, user ID, email address, a couple other data points. If I want to pull additional information about a record, I need to start bringing in some additional sets of tables here that will be nested under user base. And in today's case, where I want to be able to pull out the parent information alongside the student info, I'll need to tell it that in addition to just the user base, which in my mind is the student themselves, I want to also pull the parent-child relationship that lets me grab all of the parents of the student. So tied to that user base, I'm going to say, give me a parent-child relationship. And then on the other side of that parent-child relationship, I'm going to say, all right, this is my student. This is the relationship. Now I want to know some things about the parent of that student. So I'm going to add an additional user base. And I can see by the way that they get nested within my select objects display that this user base.
That's amazing. I would have never.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. And at this point, I'd be able to pull, my student record with every parent-child relationship. Let's actually start with that one. So we're going to start with this list where I've got, every student, and then if they've got multiple parent records tied to them, then I would want to see, 3 rows, 1 each with the parent info. Then after that, we'll look at how we could flatten that and see the single row per student with columns for a bunch of the parent info. So as the starting point, I've got my user base, I've got my parent-child relationship, and then I've got the user base of the parent record. I'll need to give the system something that lets me isolate the fact that I only want to pull my current student records. And I could do that, one of a couple of different ways. Easiest way is going to be for me to say that I want to put a filter on this user base that says the role of that user is student. So under the constituent information, I'm going to jump in here and say that the user role should be tied to this top level user base, because again, in my mind, this is the student record itself. So I want to make sure that I'm tying that role to that top level user base. And I'll say select to that. And we can see that because that user role is nested 1 level over under that user base, that this user role is describing this user base rather than this user base. If I had told it to tie to this user base, it would be indented a little bit further out. So I'm able to see by looking back at this kind of how and where and why the different data points are tied together as we're building out these relationships. I'm going to jump over to my filters for now before I go to my display fields. And in my filters, I'm just going to say that the user role that I want to look for is just student. I just want to see all of my currently enrolled students and everybody with that role. So within my filters, I'm going to create this global filter that says the user role, any of, and then I'll just find student. So I've got the word student there. I'm going to choose select. And at this point, several things going on here. So I've created this filter that the user role of student is the only role that I'm looking for. I've also told it that I want to be able to pull information from the student record, from the parent-child relationship, so the student relationship to the parent, and from the record of the person on the other side of that relationship. So info about the student, info about the parent, and info about that relationship itself. So I'm going to jump into my display fields for a minute. And I'll just start pulling out some info. And again, nothing identifying is going to come out here. So on the student side, I'm going to grab user ID. I'll pull out the grad year rather than name, just so we'll know, how old these kids are, what we're pulling out. Within the parent-child relationship, couple things that are going to be really helpful for me to see here. So, maybe I want to be able to see, parents, step-parents, and grandparents. Maybe I'm only concerned with parents. Maybe I only want to see those marked as a responsible signer on a contract. Maybe I only want to see those marked as list as parent. Maybe I only want to see those with parental access. So a lot of different ways that we could potentially slice and dice this info. I'm going to start by just outputting, what is that relationship? Is it parent? Is it step parent? Is it grandparent? This parent-child relationship, on the back end of the system, it's called parent-child, but in reality, it's any sort of a relationship between, a older user and a younger user, for lack of a better word. There's the sibling relationship. There's like a peer-peer relationship, but this parent-child picks up any case where it's a grandparent, grandchild, or parent-child. And so these short descriptions give us a lot more detail about what is that actual relationship between those records on the back end of the system. And then I'm going to pull some info about the parent record itself. So I'm going to grab the user ID of the parent, and then we'll throw the preferred name out, knowing that there may or may not be info in there, but that'll just prevent it from showing any personal information that we could push across. So I'm going to select those items. And I expect that I'm going to get, roughly 2 to 3 rows per student. And Vanessa, if we've got tons of grandparents in the back end of the system, maybe we'll have 10 rows per student. So this is kind of the fun part, is we kind of hit go and we see where it puts us. And then we can really hone in from there and say, focus in on just those listed as parent or just those with specific relationships. So I'm going to hit preview. And then we will wait. So, John, I just saw your question. Does the order matter in which we add the objects to the list? It does not. It doesn't at all. So you'll get the same result, really, as long as within the display section, we can change the column order here. So that'll shift the way that they're displaying left to right. And on the select side, the order doesn't matter, but sometimes those inner joins, that checkbox for whether it's an inner join or not, very much will have an impact on what we're seeing. So we'll come back and look at that in just a couple of minutes. Let me try this again. I don't know if I actually clicked preview. I tried a minute ago, but didn't. There we go. I think that worked. Okay, awesome. So what I'm going to do here is sort this by the user ID, just so I can start to see some of the grouping that we've got on the back end. So I've got this user ID ending in the 97 with the grad year 2027, where I've got, 2 parents and I've got 2 grandparents tied to that student. If I had chosen to output, first name, last name, and email, those would show up really cleanly for me as columns right here. So in the same way that I'm seeing the user ID right here, I could use this as a way to very quickly grab the email addresses of this group of users. I can also see the preferred name. So I didn't pull out the first name or the last name, but in this case, we do have preferred names on these parent records. So it is showing me that information. And I'm seeing, parents, I'm seeing grandparents. I bet I'll see some, there we go. I've got some step parents. I've got some step children. So in this case, I'm seeing just over 1,400 total records. Let me say for now that I am not interested in my grandparents. Maybe I'm just interested in those who are either listed as a parent or as a step parent. What I can do is back in my filters, I'm going to say that my short description 2 is not grandparent. And that'll give me the parents and the step parents while letting me exclude the grandparents from the list. So I'll just say here that short description 2. There we go. I'm going to say does not contain. And then I'm just going to type grand, because if I've got great grandparents and grandparents and step grandparents, I'm just going to say it does not contain grand. Oops. And then what that should leave me are my students with any, parents or step parents or guardians or anything other than a grandparent showing in this list. And when we preview that, we're down to 997. I think Vanessa said we had somewhere on the range of 500 students at the school. This gets us to, almost exactly 2 parents per kid. So when I'm sorted by student ID, I can see that I've got 2 parents tied to that student record as parents. As I scroll a little bit further down, this student right here, the 773, I've got 2 parents and a step parent tied to that student record. And again, I could output, names and email addresses and cell phone numbers and employers and, all kinds of other things about that group of records. But it's just a way that I can really easily target in on a group of users that I want to be able to either report on or, do anything else with. So couple other things that I want to take a look at with this first list, and I'm going to just call this parent list unflattened. So we'll save that list. Let's display this and say that for now, maybe I just want to see my responsible signers. We're getting close to contract season, and we just want to do a review of who is marked as responsible signer on a student record if we're completing the contracts through enrollment management. I can jump into that parent-child relationship, and I can ask it to display whether or not the user is a responsible signer. And then from there, if I preview that, I should get a column where in this case, that perfect example, I've got that step parent is not marked as a responsible signer. We can only have up to 2 responsible signers tied to each student record. And this is just a really clean way for me to say, give me every parent-child relationship, but then show me the columns that show whether they're a responsible signer, whether they have parental access, whether they're listed as a parent, whether they're, any of 100 different things. So we can really dive pretty deep into a lot of this data pretty quickly through the list. So at this point, let me kind of tweak the way that we're asking the question. I want to go to my filters, and I want to say that I only want to see those parents that are responsible signers. So maybe it's helpful sometimes for me to know that there are 997 parents, but now I want to say, just show me the responsible signers. Where is it? Am I missing that? Hold on, let me try that again. Somebody just asked us to explain the global filter versus the object filter in the chat. I'm going to get to that in just a couple minutes. So kind of as we switch gears and we start flattening this list to show the 1 row per student with multiple columns per parent, that object filter is going to become really important when we get to that point. Yeah, let me try that one more time. So I thought I saw it. If I jump back in there, that there we go. Responsible signer at the very bottom. So going, there we go. We'll just say, give me the trues at this point. And I would expect that this will go from that, 997 that we saw a minute ago to, I don't know, 950 to 970, somewhere in that range. Step parents maybe be removed or, other situations. So 972, there we go. So we dropped 25 users off when we told it not to include the responsible signers. Could very easily flip that around and look at it the other way and show me here are the 25 parents who are not responsible signers. Maybe that's a nice check this time of year. Just, those new families that came through admissions last spring. Maybe we haven't validated some of that responsible signer info yet. So it's just a really clean way for me to see, this person is a parent, they're listed as a parent, but they're not a responsible signer. And then we can get ahead of that before we get to the point of trying to push contracts out. So this, list, I'm going to take this responsible signer filter off because I really do want to see, a lot of this info here. This should get me back to that 997. I'm going to save and exit this list, and then we'll do a save as and look at how we can flatten it out. And that's going to give us a chance to look at the global filters versus the object filters and kind of where and how and why we would do different things with those. So then that parent listing unflattened. We're going to create a copy of this guy. So I'm going to leave that one as is for now, but we're going to create the copy here. And in this copy, we're going to just call it we'll just call it flattened. Yeah, it's all right. And flattened in my mind really means that there's one row per student record with multiple columns worth of data off to the side, where unflattened means I've got multiple rows per student, and flattened just gives me kind of that one row per record where I could potentially kind of, as I'm thinking through 6 steps down the road, if I feed it out to Power BI, I want it to be the one side of a one-to-many relationship where that student may have 12 years of user register entries that show what grade they were in during each of the years in the past decade and the next 5 years. Or on the admission side, there might be 30 checklist steps that we're tracking for that user, but I want it all to tie back to some master list. So what we're building now is kind of that master list that contains one row per user, and then anything else we would tie into that as one-to-many relationships. So in this case, I'm going to tell the system to do a couple things with those object filters that allow us to both, ensure that we have one row per student and to get all of the relevant parent information that we want to see into that same list. So kind of build that flattened list that forces that info to come out cleanly. So here, my user base, my parent-child relationship, my user role, I'm going to leave all that exactly as it is. I'm not going to touch anything here. But what I'm going to start doing is adding a couple additional parent-child relationship nodes, because that's going to enable me to add additional sets of columns for those additional parents. And we'll kind of see where and how a lot of that plays out. So I'm going to add another parent-child relationship to this main user base level. And then I'm going to add the user base under that level. So we'll tie that user base to that parent-child relationship. And then because we saw at least one case where we had 2 parents and a step parent, I'm going to add a third possible column as well. A lot of times I'll end up with 4 for 2 parents and 2 step parents as we're looking at the info. So I'm going to add another parent-child relationship. And just notice that these are all kind of nested that one layer down of this user base. So each of these is looking at parent-child relationships tied back to the main student user base on the back end of the system. And then I'm going to add the user base here for that third parent. I'm just going to do 3 parents for now, just so we can see that info come out. And I'm going to show us a couple things at once here. I'm going to leave all these inner boxes. Oh, hold on, what did I do? I did that in the wrong spot. I'm sorry, that should not be there. Let me move that user base down to where it goes. That should be under that parent-child relationship. There we go. So that's where I want that to live. And really the way that I kind of read this in my mind is, the user base, that highest level one, that's the student record. This parent-child relationship is linked back to the student. And then the other side is tied to a parent. I've got another parent-child relationship linked back to the student that goes to another parent. And then I've got another one that goes back to another parent. So with all of these inner boxes checked, it's going to do some funky stuff when we get to the point of displaying it, but I want it to do the funky stuff first so we can see why it's doing some weird stuff, and then we'll kind of back it out to look at why we would uncheck those at different times. Knowing that I've got these 3 separate parent relationships, I haven't told it yet that these are 3 different sets of people. I haven't told it, only pull the parent records. I need to tell it somehow on the back end of the system that I'm only concerned with people who are parents, and I want to make sure I'm only pulling each of those parents one time, and that I'm not pulling the same parent multiple times in each of those 3 columns. So in this object filters, that's a perfect example of where the object filters can become really useful for us. I'm going to tell it that I want to use the object filter as a way of showing information about the record rather, or showing specific information about the record rather than filtering which group of records I want to show something about. And so kind of in this case, what I'm going to say is that as I'm looking at that parent-child relationship, that very first parent-child relationship, there's this relationship ordinal field, and that ordinal tells us, what order that is of the parent-child relationships on that student record. So I can say that I've got an ordinal of 1. The next one I'm going to pull is the ordinal of 2, and then the ordinal of 3. And what that's going to do is go into that parent record, depending on the order in which those relationships were added to the student record, it's going to pull that information into different sets of columns. Where if I were just to run this right now, it's going to give me hundreds of thousands of rows because I haven't specified, which relationship is 1, which is 2, which is 3. I haven't said that the grandparents shouldn't be included in some of the second sets, but I'll build it, and then I'll kind of talk through why we're building it the way we're building it. So this first relationship ordinal, excuse me, I'm going to say that the ordinal is equal to 1. And on the back end of the system, if I've got 3 student-parent relationships on the same record, one of them is going to have an ordinal of 1, one has an ordinal of 2, one has an ordinal of 3. There's no way for me to know that in looking at the record. There's no way even in looking at the candidate or the student record itself within core or enrollment management to see it. It is truly the order in which the record was added to the system that dictates what that ordinal is. So sometimes it works that it's the order that they're listed on the record. A lot of times it doesn't, but it just does some funky stuff, and it's a fun little thing to try to sort through. So I'm just going to say that ordinal is equal to 1 and say select. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the next round of ordinals. So I added the 3 different sets of parent-child relationships. I'm going to do the same here. And we're going to say that second ordinal is 2. And then I'll select. And then we'll add the third relationship ordinal. And I just saw another note come through the chat. Yeah, there's some rhyme and reason to it, but every time I think I've figured it out, it does some funky stuff that doesn't do what I expect. So I never totally trust that I can use those ordinals in a way that are going to give me exactly what I expect. Just play with it until we get it right. It's kind of how I attack it. And then actually, so then, there we go. So I'm going to grab that last. No. So we're going to get that last ordinal. There we go. So we'll get that relationship 2 ordinal and say it's equal to 3. So what this is doing now is saying that if there are 3 parent relationships tied to that student record, we're going to have a separate set of information coming out for each of those 3 sets of parent records. And what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to get rid of this grand filter right here. We may end up pulling that back down into our object filters. But I do need to tell it to display this information a little bit differently. So when I get to my display fields, I'm going to tell it to show the same set of information, but to show it about each of those different relationship groups that we're looking at or looking for. And actually, is there something, Vanessa, blocking me from hitting that display fields? I don't know if that's something on my side or if that's like a chat window or anything. No. All right. Let me just see what's going on. Oh, I was already there. I'm sorry. I'm there. So there we go. Let me get back down to the bottom here. And we'll select the fields. So I'm going to grab the info about the second parent as well. So this parent relationship, I've got the Get the short description. I've got the user ID and the preferred name. And then we'll do the same thing for this third set of parents. And when I do this, this list is going to be way shorter than we would expect it to be. And I'll kind of talk through why that's the case when we see the results, but it's going to look a little bit different than what we actually want, but that's going to be by design at this point. User ID. All right, so now, because of the way that we've set up those ordinals, what I want to see is one row per student with columns that contain a lot of the parent information pushed off to the side. And by using those filters to specify the ordinals, that should enable me to flatten those rows. So let's go ahead and preview.
May 9th sounds awesome. On November.
And what we're going to see here is probably a very, very short list of just the students that have 3 or more relations. So I've got, a child parent, and grandchild. But notice that as I'm seeing this information right now, I'm only seeing records that have 3 sets of parents, and I'm not seeing students that only have 2 sets of parents. So if they have 2 parents and a grandparent, they're still being pulled in here. But if they only had 2 parents, I'm down to 174. This gets back to the original question that somebody asked about the joins and how we're handling those on the select objects here. So within the select objects, if this box is checked, it's only going to give me information for a record where there is some information that exists. So this guy right here is our culprit, this parent-child relationship 2. That is why I'm seeing only 174 rather than 500 rows, because there are probably 330 kids who do not have a third parent record included. So I'm going to uncheck that. I'm going to uncheck that. That inner is just saying if there's nothing on the other side of that relationship, exclude it completely from your output. And that's where using our object filter is a way that we can kind of sneak in the side door and say, only give me that person if it is that relation 3, but don't exclude them completely if there's nothing there. I'm going to do the same thing here, where I'm going to undo this parent-child relationship. I'm going to leave this for now because I assume that every student has a parent relationship. So somebody's going to be that ordinal 1. But I think that if I preview this now, we're going to jump up a lot closer to 500 than we are to this 174 number. There we go. So we're at 507 now. And we'll note that if we scroll over to the right here, yeah, I've got a lot of cases where there's just not a, here we'll go a couple pages deeper. These are some of the older kids. Yeah, we've got a bunch of grandparents in here. We've got some parents. We go even close to the end. If we get the relatively new kids, maybe we don't have them in. Yeah, so that is why I've jumped from what was it 173 to 507. Does that logic make sense on kind of why that number jumped just by simply checking those boxes? Or
Matt, I had a question. This is Liz.
yeah.
So regarding the inner joins, with the preferred name, I thought since it is checked, then it would only show us people that had a preferred name filled out. So I was a little unclear on that.
So in this case, that preferred name, because it's a good question. That preferred name lives within the user base section, and because they have something in the user base, it's pulling them even if there's nothing in that preferred name. But the fact that they have a user ID there means that preferred name not being a required field, we're displaying it if it's there, but we're not saying only show me those that do have a preferred name on the record.
Okay, so it's like that entire user base, not just like specific to the preferred name. I think I understand.
Excellent. Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So as I'm looking at this guy, like this parent-child relationship here, this just means that there just wasn't a third person. There was just, a mom, there was a dad, but there was not a third relation record that was tied. And when it just doesn't find that third record, that's where it breaks down on us when that's inner join is checked.
Okay,
Now,
thank
no, good question. So let's look at that. So maybe at this point, maybe I just want to see those parents that have the preferred name. I know I've got these 507 student records, and maybe I just want to see those cases where I have a preferred name. It's that example, but it'll let us look at some things. So I could say in my filters that, and this is one where using that Google filter is if I'm trying to either exclude the record from showing at all within my output. Global filter is definitely the way I'm going to go. The object filter is if I'm just trying to specify, which group of potential one-to-many relationship records contain data is where I'd use that object filter. So other examples are if I'm pulling like parent phone information, and if I have to use that phone number node or parent phone node, then I can add it multiple times. And I can say that, in one poll, I want to isolate wireless. In another poll, I want to isolate home phone. And by doing it that way in my object filters, I can still display a blank if there's no home phone on the record, as opposed to if I use my object filters, my global filters, if I said home phone, it would only show me records that have that home phone number. So that object filter is really a way that I can kind of hone into those one-to-many fields on the record and ask specific questions about, the many side of the one-to-many relationship on that linking.
Matt, we actually have 506 students. I said 504, but we have 506. So how are we pulling 507 in this list?
Let's take a look. So let's find out. You don't have a test student somewhere?
No, I mean, I just pulled it up on my phone and just quickly ran the student list. It's 506.
Okay.
So
Perfect. Let's find
typically
out.
I'd pull it out to Excel and like highlight duplicates and
That is
do
where
it
I
that
would
way, but
typically go, but let's see if we can use this to do it. Let's actually.
and we don't have to dig in right now. We could, but I'm just
It's a great question.
because with a flattened list, it should take it down to.
But it's only flattened in the way that we've told it to flatten it. So if I've got, potentially if I've got somebody with a relationship twice between a student and a parent record, potentially it could show up twice. I'm going to try this enable grouping options and see if I can just tell it to give me the count.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask about that. What does that actually do? Because
This enable grouping, it lets me do some summary type stuff. So in the case of that earlier list that we built, we could say, give me a count of the number of rows per user as we're pulling it out, where we know that we're intentionally creating multiple rows, but we could tell it to give me a count of the number of rows per user. It's a way to kind of force flatten the list sometimes to pull that info in. I want to try that here and just see if that gives us a backdoor into finding, which user is showing up twice on our list. So I'm going to say, group it by account of that user ID, and then I'm going to sort it by that and see if I get any cases where I've got two showing up as the count of the user IDs that are showing up in my output. And they can be really helpful. I've done it for things like, number of students enrolled in a class section. That enable grouping options let us kind of backdoor into that, where I can build the full list that gives every student enrollment. But then if I tell it to use the grouping options on the section identifier or whatever that 7-8 digit number is, if I tell it to count, then I can turn that into give me the count of the students who are enrolled in a class section directly through an advanced list, rather than having to dump it out to Excel and get that info from there. Let's see what we get here. Yeah, that got us to 495. So there's something going on. Maybe there's a student who doesn't have. Let's do this. We'll look a couple different directions here. That user role, user role is there. Let me get this off. I wonder if there's any student that just doesn't have a parent-child relationship, and it could be that they've got a guardian rather than a parent, or it could be, you know, other things potentially going on.
Yeah.
But I think, Vanessa, to your point, a lot of times what I'll end up doing is, rather than trying to dig too deep within the list itself, just dump it to Excel, run a quick look up against the student list, see what's different or missing about the record that shows differently, and then figure out how do we tweak the logic within the list itself to give what we're trying to pull.
Okay, well, that was really helpful with the enable grouping. I didn't realize you could actually do the count and see that in the column.
It's super powerful. And maybe, I mean, this being a, you know, largely a registrar group of users, do we want to kind of jump in that direction and look at, you know, class section sizes, kind of how we can use that grouping options to pull some of that info out? Is that a okay next spot to go? Or other thoughts or questions on the user list? I know there's a million directions we could go.
I'll leave it open to the group.
Okay, I'll just save this for now. We've got this here. And then let's do this. So let's create a really quick, create an advanced list where my constituent information, again, almost always when I build these things, I start with user base as my starting point, because generally it's about, you know, a user that I'm looking for some information about. So in my mind, at this point, this user base is the student record. And then I want to be able to see some details around their academic group. So I'm going to say, give me the course enrollment info tied to that student record. Give me the course group tied to the course enrollment, because only after I've got that course group can I grab the course term, which lets me then isolate the year. So I'm adding the layers of tables that'll let me get to the point where I can, you know, finally get to the filter that I want to use. So I've got the course term. I'm working on the course term. There we go. So I've got the user base, I've got the enrollment, I've got the group, I've got the term. Let me grab the course base as well, just so I can get the name of the course. And it is kind of crazy that, like, when I'm trying to get student enrollment, that I've got to go 5 layers deep just to get the name of the course that I'm pulling out. But it is what it is. And then that should be good enough. Let's start with, actually, let me grab the academic block as well. And I could pull faculty, I could pull a lot of stuff, but again, I'm trying to minimize the name showing, but I want to kind of demonstrate the functionality without outputting personal info out here. In this case, I'm going to uncheck the academic block, because it's possible that we may have course records, we may have study halls, we may have things that meet, you know, 2 out of 6 days that don't have a block assigned. So with that academic block inner join checked, it's only going to show me those that have a block assigned, where it is very possible that I could have a course record that does not have a block assigned. Or class record, I'm sorry.
They all do, but
they'll do. Okay, perfect. And again, school by school, you see everything. So the course term will have to be assigned, the course base has to be there. I'm going to tell it to start just throwing some info out. So I'm going to filter on the term being just the current year. So we're going to say the course term school year. We're going to look at this current year. And then let's actually choose a term as well. So Vanessa, what's the breakdown of terms for you guys? Is it semester?
Just type in second quarter.
Okay.
Like I always type in it like is equal to, and then I type in like 2 second, like 2 ND. Yeah, right there.
Okay, perfect. Yep. Recognize it. Excellent. So now it's isolating to just the courses that exist in the second quarter. In my display fields, I'm going to tell it to give me just a couple pieces of info. So give me the user ID, give me the give me the enrolled versus the dropped. I can tell it to eliminate my dropped if I don't want to include those in my counts. In my course group, I'm going to jump into my course base and get the course code. I'm going to pull the group identifier. And then let's just take a look at what this is going to give us. So we're going to get, a listing of every class that every student is enrolled in during the second quarter. So somewhere in the range of what, 2 to 4,000 ish. Okay, perfect. So I've got my course code and I've got my group identifier. So I'm actually going to pull out the unique section identifier as well, just in case there's multiple sections of that AP English language that maybe they both happen to be in the same block or may have the same group identifier. The system allows us to create those dupes. So I'm going to tell it to show one more thing that's definitely going to be unique to the this group ID. If I've got 2 study halls at the same time, for example, this will let me create unique counts within each of those 2 study halls. And then here, this enable grouping options, I'm going to tell it to give me a count of the user IDs in each of those sections rather than spitting out the user ID of every student in one of those sections. But this is that perfect example of where I can say, give me a count. And then let's preview it and see what we get. And my dropped, there may be some funky stuff there. We'll take a look at that in a minute, but there we go. I've got course code. Let me pull some like course titles out. That user
You may
ID.
want to limit it to upper school, but
Okay, perfect. Let's do that.
Yeah.
So let's go fields and school level. We'll just throw that out. And then I'll throw that in as a filter as well. So if we jump in here. Down in our space school level. We'll just say upper school. And then I'm going to display the course name as well. Or the course title. There we go. And then one more thing on the filters, I'm just going to say that dropped is equal to 0, just so that I don't pull my dropped students in to my current counts. Or I could do the other side and show how many kids have dropped the course within the term. But for now, I'm more interested in the enrolled. So the course enrollment dropped is equal to 0. And then this should give me a list of all of my upper school courses in the second quarter with the counts of the number of students.
yeah.
So lunch and meeting, I've got the 190 kids. Look like those are kind of like unique sections of something, kind of one-off something or others.
Yeah, it's just for scheduling purposes, so it shows on their schedule.
Gotcha. But it's a way, I mean, there's other ways to get a lot of the same type of info out of the system. I think the classes list will give us the same type of info, but it just lets us really dive deep and explore in some interesting ways. And that display fields, I think in my mind, that's one of the better examples of where that enable grouping options can be really helpful, is I can use it as a way to kind of force a count into something that wouldn't otherwise, enable me to count. I would just get 1 row per student registration rather than a summary of the counts of user IDs. So we'll just call this. And 100 other ways we could use this. So, a lot of the work that I do on the Power BI side is pulling historic enrollment data and looking at grade inflation, look at trends in, pre-COVID versus post-COVID, within a department. Are math teachers becoming tougher graders, or is it a different set of math teachers that are, grading more easily? Just basically pull all of the raw academics data out of the back end of the system and get, millions of data points. And then the list provides a really clean, tool to grab that info. And then Power BI just lets us go in a million different directions with how we may want to be able to kind of analyze and slice and dice that data. But the list is just such an incredibly powerful starting point for, anything that we're doing, because once we've eliminated the duplicates, and Vanessa, I know that we didn't do it perfectly on that one. I'd be really curious to see what was missing there or what we were missing. Once we figure out what we're missing, it kind of helps us hone in further and figure out what we need to change to get to exactly what we're trying to get. So sorry, I know that was a lot of me talking for the past hour. What questions do you guys have, or anything else that we can talk through? No? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. Once this Zoom is done buffering, I'll send a recording out. It'll put you to sleep tonight if you want a reason to go to sleep with this. But please reach out if I can help with anything, and share this with anyone else who may be interested. And if this is helpful and we want to do more and dive deeper, I'm happy to do these anytime if it's useful. All right. Well, everybody enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.